Hi everyone, this is Shalini, your host for today, and I'm very excited to welcome to our eLearning Champions podcast a special guest who is dedicated to transforming workplace training. Daniel Guimont is a senior training specialist at PERI Canada, one of the largest manufacturers and suppliers of formwork and scaffolding systems. He has designed and implemented 100 plus learning programs, boosting higher integration and streamlining training workflows. With 15 plus years in instructional design, including work with the Canadian Armed Forces, Daniel specializes in scenario based training that drives real behavioral change. His expertise spans instructional design frameworks, blended learning, and automation tools like SharePoint and Power Automate to optimize training delivery. A lifelong learner and a skilled speaker, Daniel believes in the power of education to unlock potential. So we are thrilled to have you with us today, Daniel, to discuss ID best practices to create impactful training. Once again, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Shalini. I really appreciate it.
Right, let's dive into the very first question for today. When designing training, what are the key factors you consider to ensure that it is impactful rather than just informational?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? So it's, I look at it as what's the experience that we're trying to create for the learners, for the people? And more importantly, what's the behavior that we want? So it's important to think, and I'm sure a lot of ideas think this way about the end product. If we're looking, I'll give you an example. I'll tell you a story. So when I first started with the Canadian Armed Forces, I was in the fitness department. I was an instructional a fitness instructor, and
Wow.
I started this journey as a fitness person. So my education comes from physical education. Then I went to the military as a civilian, and my first job was to prepare these military units for the different tasks that they would need to do. Now, traditionally, as a fitness instructor for the military, what we can imagine and what we see in movies usually is what happened, meaning that we would have these men and women come in the mornings, early in the mornings, 5, 6 a.m., and then we would do some jumping jacks, some push-ups, some chin-ups, some sit-ups, all that traditional stuff. But what happened in my career is we started asking the questions, why are we doing this? So yes, one, they're sweating, they're physically engaged, but what is our end goal? Then it led to other questions of who are the people that we're having this morning? Are they medical technicians? Are they infantier? Are they do they work on special operations? Are they pilots? Whatever that is, and based off just that surface level analysis, we started changing our approach. So here's something really cool that we did through my experience is traditionally we would have military members just run around the base, right? That could be 10
Right.
kilometers, 15 kilometers. So when we're doing that, there's a lot of things that are happening. The first thing is we're training the aerobic system, so the capacity of our lungs to engage, our heart to engage in endurance, long-term running. Okay. Are there risks involved? Well, yes, if we dig a little bit deeper, depending on the biomechanics, the skills of the runners, there could be injury risks to their ankles, their knees, their lower backs, et cetera, et cetera. So then we need to interject, okay, there has to be a way to do it. But even deeper, at a deeper level, when we started, this is the important thing, when we started to chat with these infanteers, these military members, and we asked them, okay, on deployment, in exercise, in a realistic scenario, how much do you run? And the answers that we were getting were 50 meters, 100 meters,
Oh,
and we're doing it very
okay.
quickly. So we're talking about sprinting. Now we're
Right.
not talking about the aerobic system, we're talking about the anaerobic system. So earlier on, we were training people with a certain risk on something they would almost never do. Now, the answer to this analysis is never, it's not to eliminate running altogether. Of course, traditions are traditions, and there's certain things that we need to keep. So
Mhm.
we could do it, but we could do it in a safe level. But instead of investing, let's say, 80% of our training time on that, why don't we invest 80% of our training time on what you're actually going to need to become a good sprinter? Because if we're training you to become slow and we need you to be fast, then we're doing
Right,
you a disservice. So all of that to to circle back to say that
right,
that was the linchpin in my that was a little bit of an epiphany, if you will, in my career as a training professional, to understand that, all right, we need to change people's behaviors. We need to really understand not exactly what is it that they want, because that's a little bit of a trap, although it's good to listen to people for
right,
sure.
right,
But what is it that they need? Because they don't always know what they need. Like the
right.
customer is not always right, as I have learned. And I now that I work in a corporate setting, I take the same approach to how I analyze. So now I'm no longer a subject matter expert. I'm out of the fitness realm, but I work with engineers, I work with salespeople, I work with people in operations, and it's the same approach where you get to understand what is it that a good performer would look like. So maybe there exists a good performer within the team, or maybe it's just a hypothetical. You're talking to a director of a department, let's say engineering,
Right.
and they're painting a beautiful picture hypothetically of an engineer, what there should do at what level, communication design levels, whatever that is. You take those notes and then you dissect it, and you start building from the ending. And then where do you start? So what is it that we start off when we do hire someone? Are they, what do they come with, and what are they missing? So a bit of that gap, and we provide them whatever they need to get to the behaviors that we identified. So that's really the key that I'm excited about.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, Daniel. That was a very interesting aha moment. You know, the kind of training you need for a sprint versus a marathon, it's an entirely different skill set. And yeah, it's very interesting how you brought that to your corporate training framework, because really it's addressing the need. It all drills down to addressing the actual need and not getting distracted by all the other things, which may be good, like you said, what they want. But I really loved what you shared about zeroing in on the actual skill that is needed, the actual behavioral change that you're targeting.
That's
So,
right.
yeah. So, Daniel, my next question is, to do with engagement. Many organizations, despite having heard, we've all been talking about engagement forever. Despite that, many organizations still struggle with building in that engagement. So, what are some strategies to ensure that training resonates with the learners? Of course, you shared about,
Mm.
meeting the actual need. I'm sure that's the key thing, because when they see the relevance, they are engaged. But what other strategies do you have?
You're absolutely right. When it comes, I would say, when we're asking the question, because I hear that often, how do you motivate people? How do you get them engaged? And it's funny because that's not a question that I ask myself. It's not something that I'm hunting for as I'm trying to prepare something necessarily. Of course, I want that to happen, engagement, like we call it.
Mhm.
But for me, that's almost a byproduct of a good design. So you really hit the nail on the head. The foundation has to be there. If you're if you're looking to build a training, you have to understand why you're doing it. And just to go back to our previous question, it has to be related to the need, and the learners have to see that connection of where they're at right now and what this is going to give them. If you can
Right.
sell that message, and I use the term very strongly here, that is going to take into consideration that motivation, that excitement, if you will. So one thing that I've learned working in the corporate world and working with salespeople is there's so many parallels between training and sales. Uh, it's incredible. It's almost the same exact job. When you think about it deeply, you're meeting with customers, you're
Right.
meeting with stakeholders or with learners, and you're providing them a service. And the idea here in both cases, selling and training, we want we want to solve a problem. We're not just going to sell something and move on. Or, I mean, I
Right.
suppose that can happen, but eventually you're going to run out of luck. But we
Right.
really want to solve a problem. And that's what we're doing in training. So if someone hence the need for a really, really good analysis. I can't stress that enough. So you
Right.
meet with your stakeholders or you meet with the people that you want to solve their problems, and you get deep and deep into the weeds of really what it is psychologically. It's almost like a
Right.
psychoanalysis of the people, of their problems. Once you engage that, there's going to be multiple different ways to get there. But the
Mhm.
more time that you spent in your analysis phase, the less time that you need in your design, meaning that you know what to do. You know exactly what to give them because it's right in front of you. So that should take care of engagement. Now, the other layer that I would say, because usually that you shouldn't be just satisfied with that. You shouldn't sit on your laurels for just that. The next step would be try to think as a learning professional, try to think of how people learn. All right. And this is another thing that I've learned through my years of military training. So in military training, my focus was on fitness,
Right.
and it was easy for us to use um, three powerful senses to help people retain in terms of their long-term memory. So the more senses that are involved in in learning something, the more ingrained. It's almost as
Right.
if you have one sense, then you have only one computer to save your progress. If you have three senses, then you have
Right.
three computers, so you're not going to lose the memory. And in fitness, it's easy because then you could provide, let's say, visuals in a classroom setting of let's say body mechanics, biomechanics, things like that. So you have the visual. So our visual sense, we have a little brain here. So we have the back of our
Right.
brain, we have a lot of real estate for our visual cueing. So definitely good advice to have visuals. Auditory as well. So instructors normally do that very well, where we're speaking, using our tone of voice, using different ways to do that.
Right.
And another one is kinesthetic, so the touch. So if you have something to touch or to understand concepts, then you have three senses that are targeting a person's brain. Ergo, it's going to be easier to for the person to grab whatever it is that you're saying. And if you're trying to learn something as well, well, sure, you could go through a book, but if you do exercises from that book where you have to actually move, maybe write certain things down, notes and all that, you're going to grasp that information a little bit more. So all of that to say is have a solid foundation of why you're doing this. And the other is understand how a person register and use as many of the techniques to engage them in that matter. Make it relevant and make it stick.
Right. Thank you. I really love what you said about motivation being a byproduct of good design. I think that's really a very great takeaway because sometimes we think motivation is just a motivation hook inside of a learning course. How do we just hook them? But it
Mm,
begins even earlier. If you set the right foundation, you have them motivated already. And you don't have to persuade or sell your course too hard because learners will see the relevance and the need. So thank you for that. And I totally agree with you about you saying that it's very akin to sales. Because what are we selling, really? How are we persuading our learners? So, yeah, thank you for those great examples and analogies.
My
So,
pleasure.
you mentioned, you're passionate about designing impactful training to drive behavioral change.
Mm.
So, and when we think of behavioral change, we automatically associate it with some kind of scenario based learning, because those are as close to the real world as you can bring the learner to. So, what role do you think scenario based learning plays in making training stick? And how do you design effective scenarios?
That's a really good question. So scenario-based learning, it's something that I did in part a little bit, but when I started working in the business world, um, I studied it and understood it a little bit more, so I can say that I'm more grounded into it. But what is scenario-based learning? Essentially, it's trying to throw a learner into a similar environment in which they will face or they might face within
Right,
their work scenario, and they have to make decisions, and within those decisions obviously there's going to be some decisions that are good, maybe great even, and there are going to be decisions that they may make that are going to be bad, detrimental, if you will, to their company or to whatever they're trying to aim.
right,
So let's take an example. Let's say we're training sales. All right, so you can train on product. That's super important. If you have any products to to sell as an organization, your salespeople should know more than your customers, or to a certain degree, if they're starting, maybe not
right,
so much. You might have some customers that are very knowledgeable in your field, uh, the but if you're onboarding sales, you don't want to just throw them to the wolves and say, here are some product trainings, off you go.
right,
Now, do the best that you can. It would be in your best interest as a hiring manager to see the behavior of your salesperson in a scenario. So this could be a role play. Role plays are usually something that I would use for sales in this
hmm,
scenario. So you could role play with a few of your staff members, let's say, and you can get them to do the best that they can in the scenario that you created. And what's interesting with this scenario is, although there's stress involved, although it's uncomfortable, it's not fun to do role plays, especially if your boss is
right,
there. That stress is what's going to really hit your long-term memory. So the stress that you have, that anxiety, if you will, is going to really make you retain. But here's what I've learned, which is I find so amazing, almost like how could you not do scenarios, is if you have this salesperson that fails, they make the wrong decision, they're doing the best that they can, they make the wrong decision, and the manager is there, the manager coaches them, explains why the decision is bad, what would have happened if they would have continued. So it's not just throwing them in a scenario, it's
right,
providing the real life consequences of
right,
their choices or actions. That's the key thing. If you're provided, or if you're told that the consequences are, the company loses its reputation, which is a big deal. We lose this customer forever, or it's going to be hard to regain them, or we
hmm,
lose this sale, or all of that. We have an emotional connection to that. We feel bad. That
right,
anxiety, it's bad, but it's good in the sense that it will tell your long-term memory to retain that, and you will never repeat that behavior. You know, they say in a job, if you do something bad, if you'll never repeat that same fault again because you feel so bad. So why not use that as an advantage, but instead of throwing them in a real scenario where that could actually happen and we could have
right,
those undesirable consequences, let's say, we control the environment, we throw them in there, and we tell them what would have happened without it happening ever again. The person feels a little bit bad, uncomfortable, and all that, but they will never repeat it. And on the upside, if they do get the good answer, let's say, they'll also get feedback and say, hey, that would probably work in reality, you'd probably make
Right.
the sell, etc. Then they retain that behavior, and you have dopamine, you have maybe potentially serotonin that just goes in there and solidifies that behavior so that you repeat it in a future setting. Ergo, whatever you do in the scenario, whether good or bad, you're going to remember what the good thing should be, and you should be going there. I will add, though, however, it's not as easy as it sounds. You really need a good coach or good set of consequences. So I've
Right.
mentioned the role play where you have a
Hmm.
manager. So the manager has to really understand what's going on in terms of this learning environment and be able
Right.
to provide those consequences in a manner where the person will get them. And it's also possible to do it in a setting like in e-learnings. So you could use articulate storyline, for example, do branching
Right.
scenarios and have the consequences pop up. So that's another way of doing it. Uh, Longer to create, but you could spread it out to more people. And I would say if you'd have to pick and choose, always pick live people in a setting. But if you're trying to spread it out to, let's say, you're heading a big region, a market region, let's say
Right.
North America, where I'm at. Well, maybe I can't travel everywhere, so
Mhm.
I could create those instead of, again, just giving them information about products or information about selling. It's better than nothing, but I can throw them into a virtual scenario with a
Right.
virtual customer and get them to make choices and get them to understand what the consequences of those choices would be.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. That's a wonderful way of explaining this. I mean, we all know that scenarios are powerful because, you put learners in a risk-free environment. But I like what you said about adding a little bit of anxiety because that's a little bit, just the right balance is a good thing. I think we have a tendency to mollycoddle our learners a bit too much. So this, what you shared, achieving the right balance between giving them something that will, bring out the best and the worst in them, whatever be the case, and then reinforcing the right kind of behavior. I think that's really bound to stick rather than, as you said, just throwing a bunch of information at them. So, and coming to our next question, Daniel, how to balance theoretical concepts like ADDIE or action mapping with, the practical constraints of corporate training?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, we talked about a lot about scenarios, and now we're going to talk about action mapping. So, I'm a big fan of the book Map It by Kathy
Kathy
Moore.
Moore, yeah,
Yes,
he's a
big fan of
legend.
hers.
Yes, yes, I'm a big fan.
And she that's absolutely where I got. I was doing scenarios before understanding what she was doing, but now that I've went through her courses, I've read the book multiple times. I can't get enough of it. Uh, I have a different approach to. I understand it better, and I have a different approach, and I'm always trying to get better at it, and I think it's a lot of fun. Um, but how do you use the ADDIE model and the action map? So the ADDIE model is it's an important guideline, and I think it should be looked as a guideline, meaning that not everything is going to go exactly according to plan, but it's always good to have a plan, despite the fact that you're not going to follow it
Right.
step by step, because if you have nothing, then everything is just going to be a bit of a blur. As I've mentioned earlier, I would say the analysis phase is the most important phase, in my opinion. You could argue that they're all important. One without another phase, the whole thing crumbles. But for me, the more time and quality that you spend in the analysis,
Mhm.
chatting with people, surveys are a good tool, but it can't just be surveys. You have to really get to talk to people, sit them down. Kathy Moore suggests she calls them kickstart meetings, I think, where you should have at least 2 hours. And at first, when I read that, 2 hours with a stakeholder, what am I going to talk about? But after I've done it a few times, it really It really is that. It's almost as if you're psychoanalyzing the stakeholder. It sounds bad in one sense, but at first the conversation, the first few minutes is it's all about what they want. I'm thinking about this training. I want this. I want my people to do this and that. And you listen, you take it in. It's a bit of a journey. So it's not. Don't jump to the end right now. Like let them
Right.
show that you're listening. Really, really important. Then once things kind of settle in, that's when you probe them a little bit more, just like a salesperson would probe a
Right.
customer to better understand, okay, what are your needs? What are the problems that you face? If you would have this, would that solve the problem? If you would have this, what would a good engineer, salesperson, operator look like to you? And then they can think about it, because a lot of times what I've learned is through our rational brain, where we have language, it's really, really hard to get deep inside of what our fears are, because over here, this is our emotional center of the brain, and we will feel those deep emotions. Those emotions, those signals are good, but it's hard to put them into words. So we, as learning and development people, we have to cater and foster that kickoff meeting, listen to the people, challenge them in certain ways to really, really understand that. Once we have a lot of data, so our data from our conversations with the stakeholders, data from, let's say, surveys with a group of people. So imagine a department, right? The
Mhm.
engineering department. You survey
Right.
them. Maybe you get 50% results, but that's in my book. That's a pretty good
Yeah.
result. Then you can have some focus groups where you're talking to subject matter experts to get their perspective. Because what a stakeholder, let's say a director of a department, sees of the problem, the operators, the technical people, they might see it completely different. So you need to hear their
Right.
side of the stories. And once you get all of that, everything becomes a little bit easier. So when you're doing your design, when you're doing your development, you kind of know what you want to hit in terms of those big points that are going to change that behavior that you focused on. And
Right.
going back to the action map, it's paramount. When you start a project, especially if it's a big project, you need to know what your goal will be. What is the behavior that you're looking to change? And how are you going to measure that? That's the other thing that for me
Right.
changed a lot. We talked a lot about metrics in terms of training and development, but that
Mhm.
can't be brushed off so easily. You really have
Right.
to be able to measure, capture wherever the people you want to train, where are they at right now, and where you want them to be, so that when you're designing and developing that, you hit those markers. And if you don't hit it at the end of the training, then you can reevaluate, try to understand what went wrong, what you've missed. But if you did hit those markers, you could think, okay, how can I hit them even better? How can I bring the bar a little bit higher for next time, and things like that. So that was also something, the measurement, that I didn't take seriously at first, but after reading Kathy Moore's book Map It, that really solidified, and I can understand why. Why are we going through this activity? It goes back to the why. If I
Right.
can't measure it, and if I can't show you that you're different from when we first started this, whether it's a week, a month, 6 months, whatever it is, then that could take you out of engagement. But if I can measure it, or throw you, say, hey, this is where we're going, there's a good chance that we're going to hit it, we're probably going to get engagement in there. People should be excited to see, hey, I'm going to be this much more productive in my personal and professional life. It's
Right.
hard to say no to that.
Right. Right. Yeah. Thank you. On a tangential note, Daniel, stakeholders are super busy people. How do you
Yes.
persuade somebody to agree to a 2-hour meet?
That is a good question. I love that. Yeah, absolutely. At first, when it happens, I'll tell you a story. When I when I finished reading Kathy Moore's book, I thought to myself, okay, 2 hour stakeholder meeting. How am I going to do that? And it's not as if these training experiences happen all the time. Most of the time, I'm
Right,
just at my desk doing my things, working on a project, and stakeholders are just being stakeholders and doing their jobs. But one time, someone approached me and they said, "Hey, uh, we're going to do this big project and I want you to find a solution to this. I want my people to be able to do this." And that's the opening door. Now, if I were as shy as I was back in the day, or just following through, if I was more junior, I'm thinking about, let's say, 10 years ago, I would have just said, okay, no problem, and then got to work, maybe open up a Rise file, nothing with Rise, but fill it with information, maybe a video or
right,
two, and off we go. But what I did instead is, first of all, you thank him, right? You really show appreciation and gratitude to people that come to see you because they don't have to use your service. Absolutely
right,
not.
right.
So the fact that they're coming to see you is a really good sign. And then you kind of praise it. So you say, this is a really interesting project. I'd love to know more. I really want to dive deeper into why you're so passionate about that. Would it be a problem for you to sit down with me in a week or two for, I know it might be long, but maybe 2 hours, because I really, really wanted to dive deep. I believe that when you show curiosity to people, despite the fact that they're busy or not, people are going to provide time. And when I try to empathize with people that are busy, we're talking about directors of departments, VPs, or even CEOs. Have done this with CEOs as well. When you show curiosity, yes, they are busy. So it won't be today, won't be tomorrow, it won't be next week. But if you're curious about what they want to do, they will provide time.
Right,
Especially if you say, I'd like to take at least 2 hours to really go deep into that, it's hard for them to say no. They won't give you the time right now, but the fact that you're showing curiosity, not a lot of people probably show them curiosity to this thing,
right,
and here you are, you're offering something that they don't really get. So they will love to talk. They will love to
right,
say everything that they can about this because they are passionate about it. The reason why they're passionate about it, they came to see you, or else they would have done it their own way or this and that. So they have to be passionate about it. That's how I look at it. At first, I was a bit scared of how am I going to do it, but when you propose it, I haven't seen anybody refuse it thus far.
right. Thank you. I'm sure that's a very valuable tip for our listeners because, that is something we hesitate with. How can I make so many demands on their time? But as you said, express a genuine interest in what they're trying to accomplish, and then, yeah, they become co-partners in this training. Daniel, you talked about the importance of measuring the impact of training, or the importance of measuring how successful the training has been in learner
Mhm.
retention. So, can you share an example of a training program that you've designed that had very tangible, measurable success in terms of both learner retention and performance?
Yeah, yeah. I really, I love this question because it forces us to become creative. I'll give you another story where I worked with a department that deals with customers, and we were talking about KPIs, key
Mhm.
performance
Right.
indicators. And as I was going through the key performance indicators, one of the things that popped up to me in my mind would be the performance of the worker on the phone with the customer. So the
Right.
quality of the call, are they resolving the problem? Things like that. And I never saw that as a KPI. So I was scratching my head. I was thinking, well, how is this not measured? Because this is they do this all day long. It has to be 90% of their day, maybe 80 at the least, and we're not measuring that. So how do we know where they're at and where they're going? Now, to be fair, supervisors are joining on calls and giving feedback, which is fantastic. Like that's already a step in the right direction. But how do you know if you're better this year than you were next year? And let's say that you want to be the best, right? You don't
Right.
just want to meet the minimal standard. You actually want to really, really thrive because there's incentives to thrive. Maybe the company makes more money, maybe you get bonuses or whatever it is. But
Mhm.
how, it's great that your boss thinks that you're decent, but where do you scale? Like, are you at the bottom of decent? Are you at the top of decent? How are you comparing to your teammates? How are you comparing to other people in the field?
Right.
So while I saw that this was not a KPI, I challenged the manager and I asked, why is this not measured? And one of the answers that I received was, well, we don't know how to measure it, so we're not going to put it as a KPI. And I pushed back and I said, okay, it's not because we're, you know, not capable of measuring it for now that it shouldn't be a KPI. Let's look at what's important and then we'll figure out how to measure it. Just like the analysis.
Right.
Let's look at what you really, really need and not let's not worry about how are we going to do this, because sometimes
Right.
we could go into deep ends where how am I going to create? Don't worry about it. We're not there yet. But
Right.
what is it that we want? Then we could become creative. And maybe if we have to make cuts because of resources and time and whatever, we make cuts, but we try to aim for that target as much as possible. So let's get that target right. So when we were able to put that back into the KPIs, what we were able to do then is to create a simple monitoring guide where a supervisor would have a sheet of paper where we could quantify
Hmm.
subjectively and objectively. So that's the thing. A lot of people sometimes will have resistance for subjective metrics,
Right.
right? In a
Right.
conversation, a lot of it is subjective. But the
Absolutely.
thing is, if you have consistent subjective data,
Hmm.
you have consistent data so you can see progress or regression or stagnation,
Right.
and then you could provide feedback. But if you're not taking that data in, the person is just assuming that my current behavior is okay, let's continue with the same operation.
Right.
So if you use a monitoring guide where your supervisors will take notes on subjective data such as let's say tone of voice, although you could argue whether that's subjective or objective, but okay, tone of voice.
Right.
How was the tone of voice? Okay, then how long were you talking? Was it more so you on the phone or more so the client, or a bit of half and half? Because if it's 80% them and 20% you, that probably means that you're showing that you're listening. So if you're not talking as much in certain scenarios, that could be a very good metric. And that is completely objective. How long is the call? That's another objective metric. So if you resolve the problem, which is fantastic, but you resolve it in 10 minutes, and now you're resolving same types of problems in 2 to 3 minutes, that is an objective factor that we're
Right.
taking into consideration. So it goes back to understanding what the behavior it is that you're looking for, and deep dive into that. Like, what are the sub behaviors that follow through with that main behavior? And then find, don't worry about whether it's too subjective or whether it's not enough objective. You'll find
Right.
objective things. Just find whatever you can measure. And maybe with technology or with more creativity, you'll be able to capture data in a more effective way. But even if
Hmm.
today you have just a pen and paper and you're listening, you have your ears, that is better than having absolutely nothing. So in the future, let's say you get some fancy software, you get some recording tools and all that, and you can measure it and get it better. Well, you can compare that with the paper stuff, so you still have a trail. So don't worry about um, don't look at lack of resources as an issue. Try to become resourceful in the way that you're going to measure it. Even if it's a little subjective, it's better than nothing.
Right, right. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. That those are practical, points that I'm sure we would all be better off by implementing. So I was just wondering, Daniel, you said something about, not everybody has these KPIs laid out. Sometimes you have to persuade them to start defining these KPIs. So if you were to measure the impact of, this training initiative later, how would you go about it? Because, if they haven't really captured the initial, no, there's no diagnostic, so to speak,
Mm,
then how would you, demonstrate the progress at the end if there's no pre and post training kind of an assessment? I was just wondering.
yeah, that is a really challenging situation to be put in. If you don't, well, okay, so here's the thing. I've been tossed into a similar scenarios. I'll give you this. I think this is going to be interesting. When I first started in the business world, I came to my position and there was already onboarding programs going on. So I
Mhm.
was the first training person in my company. Ergo, the training that was created were created by managers, directors, people in those departments that see a need for it. There's a new hire. We need to get them up to speed. We need to get them to be able to do something. So what are we
Mhm.
going to put in? And those people have done a great job. And what really matters is their intention, which is fantastic. They saw a problem, they figured out a solution, and they did the best that they could with what they have. And sometimes just that could be enough. Now, I come in and I look at the programs that are already going on. One of the questions that I've asked them and that they didn't really ask themselves is a little bit of the theme that we're talking about today in the podcast is what does a good professional in your field, in your department
Mhm.
look like? So when I had that information with them, I was able to look at what the program was, and I ended up actually making a lot of cuts. So I'll give you an example. One of the things that I did with all the onboarding programs is I would chat with the learners once they were finished. So usually it would take maybe let's say 5 to 7 weeks to go. So you're starting a new job, you go through a few weeks, and
Right.
the more complicated your job, the longer you're going to go through. And when I was doing my review of a program that I did not create. I just come in and I ask a few questions to the learner, which they themselves are new as well. And I said, okay, how does this prepare you for your job? And oftentimes they don't have a good comparison because they're just starting the job, but they can give
Right.
me a fair amount of information.
Mm.
So I could extrapolate and I could see, okay, there are certain things that we're giving them that we're hitting the mark, and there are certain things that they don't really need right now. So then I go back to the stakeholders and I ask that poignant question of what is a good professional? What does a good engineer look like? What does a good logistics technician look like? Okay,
Right.
then I look at what the content is with them because at this stage I don't know what the content means. I'm very novel in the experience, and I kind of challenge them and I say, all right, this meeting, how does this help them be prepared? This e-learning, how does it help them? And when they
Mhm.
really can't answer the question, they themselves kind of say something like, well, I guess we could cut it. And this goes back to engagement, which is funny enough. So if you cut certain things and you make it more relevant, the person's going to be more engaged. If there's something in my onboarding that I'm going through an e-learning, let's say,
Mhm.
And here's an example. There was something about travels. So in our company, you travel, and we have software to use the travel, and we would there's an e-learning that tells you how to navigate that and how to put your information, and it's wonderful.
Right.
But as a new employee, are you going to need that? And my epiphany of that moment happened where I did the training myself, and when I first started traveling was 6 months in.
Right.
Shalini, I didn't remember what I learned 6 months ago because I had no incentive to remember it because there was
Right.
no expectation of me doing that. So we cut that and we cut other things, not to say that there's anything wrong with the training. We cut it only to use it at those appropriate moments. So if you're going to be traveling in 6 months, we're going to
Right.
give you that just before you travel because now you're going to retain it and it's
Right.
going to be helpful. But why should we give you something that lasts 20 minutes when we could give you something that's more pertinent, especially if that
Right.
20 minutes you're not going to use it until 6 months, 8 months, whenever it is that you're going to travel. So it became really, really important for that was one of the ways that I evaluated talking with the stakeholders. Again, there's no way around it. You just need to
Right.
talk with those people. You need to talk with the people that are doing the job as well. You need to look at the current situation. you and you just kind of play Legos. You take off blocks that are not needed, that don't give
Right.
you the goal. So really get an important goal, and put things that maybe are not there yet that will help to expedite the process to that goal. The other thing that I'd love to add, especially with onboarding, because when you come in with a mentality of let's cut things to make it streamline, sometimes you cut things that, yes, answer the question, does this make you ready for your job? But there's certain things that don't necessarily get you ready for your job, but they're really, really good culturally. So, for example, in the company that I work for, we would have meetings with certain departments, even meetings with the CEO that we would prepare for the new hire. And when you technically dissect that question, does this get the person ready for their job? It doesn't really answer that, but it is culturally something really relevant, and it
Mhm.
helps the person understand that they're cared for, that they're part of a company, that even the CEO
Right.
will take 30 minutes of his or her busy day to sit down and
Right.
welcome you and answer a few questions and get to know you. So there are
Right.
these exceptions. The only thing is you don't want to get too overwhelmed with these exceptions. So it's this is the part that I would say the art of
Mhm.
designing, where you have to, I guess it comes with experience. You have to really understand what's a good level of technical capabilities and nice, warm and fuzzy.
Right.
We're showing you
Right.
that we care here. It's not just about getting you ready, but we want you to know that you're appreciated. We picked
Right.
you, not the other people that did the interview, and
Right.
we want to invest in you.
Right. Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. The emotional connect piece, that's often overlooked in our rush to create all the other technical part of it and get it right. So, on a similar, note, how do you incorporate storytelling and emotion or real world context into your designs?
Storytelling is a challenge for me. So this is something that I'm working on, but I'll give you a few examples. When going back to the customer service example that I was talking about,
Mhm.
one of the things that we did for a scenario base training, so instead we created the monitoring guide. Fantastic. So now we have a piece of paper or piece of data to grab that information. The other thing is we have to measure that. So we could use real live calls,
Mhm.
or if we want to practice and become better, we're going to do scenarios, right? That That is the answer. So how are we going to do scenarios? Well, in this case, much like sales, I thought that one of the best approaches would be role plays. Now, how do I, little old me, training person that doesn't do that job, create these stories to put people in? And stories are such a powerful tool. So how do I do that? Well, the way I did that was I would chat with my subject matter experts from that department and ask
Mm-hmm.
them, can you provide me a story at work where you were with a customer and it was impactful? Let's say it was either very, very positive, it went
Mm-hmm.
well, or even maybe it went very, very negative. Either way,
Right.
it's not your regular call. It's something that happens once in a while. You could call it a disgruntled customer or whatever it is that you want, but something significant that you remember. And tell me in detail. So I had them write those stories. They
Mm-hmm.
provided me those stories. And when I was reading those stories, I was able to create a scenario. So I modified certain things because I didn't want it
Right.
to be too obvious, but I was able to use those emotional cues to say, okay, what's the situation that the learner is thrown into in case these service providers, what are the choices that they need to do, and what are the consequences of those choices? And I had all of that through the stories that they gave me. I just had to make a form to build a role play. And when it came to the day of the role play, I would I would make a team of 3 people. So
Mm-hmm.
you would have one person that's acting as themselves, so they're actually the ones learning and getting feedback.
Right.
One person would have a piece of paper that would have the role play. So they would read,
Right.
okay, I'm this disgruntled customer. If this happens, I do this. If that happens, I do this, et cetera, et
Mm.
cetera. And off they go. They do the best that they can. And sometimes they go a little bit off of script, but that's more
Yeah.
than okay. And then the third person would have the other sheet where they're taking notes. They're
Observer.
taking
An
the
observer.
data.
Beneath. Right.
There you go. And we do that for a few minutes. Then we have the team members give feedback, and then we have the manager give feedback, and myself as well give feedback, and then we rotate. We change roles. So that was one way of doing it. When I'm doing scenario-based e-learning, it's the exact same approach. I'm going to go to an SME. I'm going to ask them what's the story, how does it go. I'm going to build it, and instead of building a role play or a script or something to guide you, I I would build it in terms of this little scenario, virtual scenario. So I'll put visual characters,
Right.
uh, maybe 1 or 2 characters depending on the scenario, what they say or what they do that now the learner has to make a choice. So let's say they have 3 choices. They have to choose. Whenever they choose a choice, if they choose a bad choice, they get the consequence and they get the understanding of what that consequence is, long, short term and long term, so
Mm-hmm.
that they get that hit in the brain. And if they get the consequence, well, it's the same thing. It's not just well done, you picked the right answer.
Right.
It's more,
Right.
because you did this, your teammates were able to thrive. The customer
Right.
was so happy that they contacted your manager, et cetera, right? You lay
Right.
down
Right.
what would really, really happen in a realistic scenario.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that really comprehensive response to that question that I'm sure interests most of our listeners. So, maybe we have time for one or two last questions, Daniel. So, what are some trends in instructional design that excite you right now?
Okay. So I've last year I engaged in the Devlin Peck Instructional Designer Boot Camp. So
Uh-huh.
he's I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
Yes,
he's
yes.
every
He's
time you
amazing.
Google instructional
Yes.
design, you find his name. And I
Yeah.
went through his boot camp, which was phenomenal. Like I'm really, really proud of the work I've done and what I've learned. He does an amazing job.
Hmm.
And he these days he's talking a lot about AI. And one of the things that excites me. So a few weeks ago, I started doing these LinkedIn Learning JavaScript So I know nothing about JavaScript at all. So I went through the course and I'm still very, very lost, but I understand what it looks like. So I'm still starting off.
Right.
What excites me about these trends is I love what e-learning can do because e-learning can really target the masses. So I'm excited about that. Face to face is really the one where you're going to get that connection, but you could still get a decent connection through e-learning if it's designed right. And we
Right.
talked about scenario design, so you could definitely bring scenarios and storytelling in e-learning as we've chatted. But what I'm excited about is the potential of, instead of having in your e-learning your 3 or 4 choices with the consequences, to actually integrate somehow. So, I'm talking as if I know how to do this, but I'm learning how to do it. A chat bot where if you have a character, they don't just write the prompt that you wrote, but they actually write as if they are the character. So they stay within that character. They're not writing what
Right.
you would have written, but it's what the character would say. And instead of the learner choosing these choices, they actually type, or dare I fantasize and say that they chat
Yeah, they speak.
through this.
Yes, yes.
I'm dreaming a little bit, but let's start with the typing on their keyboard.
Right.
So what I'm imagining, we were talking about sales. So imagine you're a new salesperson. Instead of having those choices, you actually type what you would say to the customer, and then this bot would understand what you're saying and then
Right.
behave a certain way. So if you're not hitting the particular marks that you would put into your chatbot bot for your learner to hit, that you would have a negative consequences, and then you could have the character change their state. They're grumpy or whatever, but you get that direct feedback. And for me, I'm really excited about that because it's almost as if we're getting as close as possible to the real life
Real.
thing,
Yes,
or
absolutely.
the role play. So we're getting so close there, but we're targeting a mass of people. So if you have a big company and you have salespeople across a continent,
Mhm.
then, and you're just a small training team of, let's say, 3 people, well, you can do something really, really powerful. Yes, it's not as good as being there in role play, but you can't do that. So I'm
Right.
excited about integrating chatbots within
Absolutely.
articulate storyline or other types of medium to get those reactions and that behavioral change.
Right. Thank you, Daniel. Actually, this really resonates with me because I found myself wishing the other day that I wish my course would talk to me. It would let me talk to it and give me, feedback, respond as a real person would do in real time. That would be so fabulous. Almost an AI coach inbuilt into the course. So yeah, for all you know, even while we're speaking, somebody out there has already developed it and is using it because there's so
Probably.
many things happening. There's something new every day.
Yeah,
So yeah,
probably.
yeah. Thank you so much, Daniel. We are at time, but I would just hate to leave this conversation without one final question on if an organization wants to level up its training programs but doesn't know where to start, what would be your top 3 recommendations?
Hmm. Top 3 recommendations. First thing is, if you have nothing, just start with something. So, for example, if you don't have a training cell or a training specialist, or someone that can help you do those deep dives analysis, just try to have anything. So, for example, if you're dealing with complicated products and you want to hire new salespeople, they're not going to have that background. Well, mentorship, pair someone up with someone that's good. And that usually is the default situation that people would gravitate. But I would say it's probably one of the best ones that you could do. The down part is you'll have your high performer that can't perform as much because they have to
Right.
mentor the other person, but that should be the price that you pay. And it's hard to get away from. It's hard to get away from your not using your best people
Definitely.
within training, because if you want your new hires to be like your best people, well, eventually they're going to have to kind of sit down together and do something. And
Right.
a good onboarding will make sure that we're using those resources adequately. But if you
Right.
have nothing, pair someone with a good performer that you trust, that is also a good communicator, because sometimes you might have some really good
Right.
performers,
Right.
but they just don't know how to connect with someone. So if you're a attentive manager and you can dissect that, I would say
Mhm.
that would be the first place to start.
Right.
Like I mentioned, anything is better than nothing. So even if you have nothing right now and you're saying, hey, let's give them this, and you're not too sure if it's too much or not enough, it's better than nothing. It's better than
Right.
nothing.
Absolutely.
It at least shows to the new hire that you care. So that's a step in the right direction.
Right.
And
Right.
if I would say the last thing is would be to listen to your team. So let's say that you're listening to this podcast and you're a hiring manager and you're too small of a company to have a training person, and you want to do the best that you can, and you work with a team of professional. Let's say you have a small team of 5 people. Well, sit down with those 5 people and say and ask them w- really what it is that they do about their job, what it is that it's important about their job. Try to mark down what those things are. Really try to separate the wheat from the chaff, meaning that there's a lot of things that you could give to your new hires when training, but what is the most important thing? So listen to your staff, take a lot of notes, and from there you should have a good idea of what to do and what to avoid, and then you could build something that would be a great start to inviting someone in your company, your department, and making them feel like they're appreciated, and giving them tools and capabilities that they didn't have a few weeks ago.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel. We've gained a lot of insights into, what all goes into making training really impactful. And we really enjoyed the stories that you shared and the real life examples. So thank you once again. And thank you, listeners. Do stay tuned in for our next podcast. Thank you once again, Daniel. It was a pleasure
Thank you
having
so
you.
much. It was a pleasure.